Merritt Blackwell, 30, stood frozen in the doorway of her childhood home as her family toasted her younger sister's Paris trip with champagne on Merritt's birthday. To Sabrina, who always makes us proud, her father declared, not even acknowledging Merritt's presence. 8 years of being the family disappointment had prepared her for many things, but not for becoming completely invisible. What happened next would shake the Blackwell family to its very foundation. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into how my family betrayal story unfolded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you team cut them off completely, or team serve revenge cold? Hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, and subscribe to join our community of survivors who turned family drama into personal triumph. Now let's get back to the moment my entire world shifted. The Blackwell family dynamic had always been painfully clear. Sabrina could do no wrong, while Merritt could do nothing right. Growing up in their sprawling colonial home in Connecticut, the sisters were treated as though they belonged to entirely different families. Sabrina, 2 years younger, was the quintessential golden child, straight-A student, accomplished violinist and prom queen with a natural talent for charming everyone she met. Their parents, Richard and Eleanor Blackwell, prominent figures in local politics and old money circles, showcased Sabrina at every opportunity, while Merritt was consistently relegated to the shadows. Merritt, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of her childhood. When Sabrina won a regional science fair, her parents threw a lavish party. When Merritt placed second in a national writing competition, she received a distracted, "That's nice, dear." The pattern continued through high school and college, with Sabrina receiving a brand new car for graduation, while Merritt got a gift card. Despite the obvious favoritism, Merritt had maintained a relationship with her family, even if it meant swallowing her pride and accepting her second-tier status. She had worked twice as hard for half the recognition, putting herself through graduate school with minimal family support, while Sabrina's education was fully funded. After completing her master's in library science, Merritt secured a position at a prestigious university archive, a career achievement that barely registered with her parents compared to Sabrina's entry-level marketing job at a friend's startup. What made the situation even more painful was that Sabrina seemed to relish her golden child status, often making backhanded comments to Merritt at family gatherings. "Not everyone can be exceptional, but you're doing okay, considering your limitations," she'd say within earshot of their relatives. Or "Mom and Dad just worry about you more because you're not as naturally gifted." The previous year, when Merritt had announced her promotion to head archivist, Sabrina had immediately countered with her engagement announcement, effectively stealing the spotlight yet again. The entire family had erupted in celebration, leaving Merritt's achievement completely forgotten. Her fiancé Brad, a real estate developer with political connections, had been enthusiastically welcomed into the family fold in a way Merritt's boyfriends never were. Merritt had spent years in therapy unpacking the psychological damage from being the family scapegoat. Her therapist, Dr. Levinson, had encouraged her to establish boundaries, but Merritt still clung to the hope that one day her accomplishments would be recognized. She maintained contact with her family, attending holidays and important events, telling herself that family was family despite the pain they caused. Her 30th birthday had seemed like the perfect opportunity for some long overdue recognition. She had specifically checked with her parents months in advance, confirming they would host a small dinner. Eleanor had agreed, though without much enthusiasm. Merritt had even taken the day off work, spent hours getting ready, and picked up a bottle of her father's favorite whiskey as a thank you gesture. What she hadn't expected was to arrive at her parents' home, to find a celebration already in progress, not for her birthday, but for Sabrina's last-minute acceptance into a prestigious marketing conference in Paris, all expenses paid by her parents as a career investment. The conference dates just happened to coincide with Merritt's birthday week, and rather than reschedule, the Blackwells had simply decided that Sabrina's opportunity was more important. As Merritt stood in the doorway watching her family celebrate her sister without even noticing her presence, 30 years of accumulated hurt crystallized into something harder and colder. The whiskey bottle suddenly felt heavy in her hand. She placed it quietly on the entryway table and turned to leave when her mother finally spotted her. "Oh, Merritt, I completely forgot you were coming by today," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave. "We're celebrating Sabrina's big news. She's flying to Paris tomorrow for that exclusive conference. Only 50 people from across the country were selected." "It's my birthday," Mom Merritt said quietly. "We had plans. You were supposed to host dinner, remember? Was that today?" Her father's voice boomed from across the room. "Well, we can do it another time. This Paris opportunity can't wait. It could be career-changing for your sister." Sabrina smirked over her champagne glass. "Sorry to steal your thunder, sis, but don't worry, I'll bring you back a keychain or something." The room erupted in laughter, and something inside Merritt finally broke. Years of therapy and boundary-setting discussions couldn't prepare her for the perfect storm of humiliation and erasure happening in that moment. As her family turned back to Sabrina, continuing to toast her success without a single acknowledgement of Merritt's birthday, she realized with crystal clarity that nothing would ever change. In their eyes, she would always be the lesser daughter. What her family didn't know was that Merritt had recently made a life-changing discovery while organizing the university's historical archives, information that would forever alter the power dynamics of the Blackwell family. Standing there invisible on her 30th birthday, Merritt made a decision. If her family wanted to pretend she didn't exist, she would show them exactly what that really meant. The discovery had come 3 weeks earlier, buried in a collection of documents Merritt was cataloging for the university archive. An alumnus had donated personal papers related to a local political scandal from the 1982nd, and Merritt had been methodically sorting through them when a familiar name caught her eye: Richard Blackwell. At first, she assumed it was coincidence. Her father was hardly the only Richard Blackwell in Connecticut. But as she read, further details emerged that could only relate to her father: the same law school, the same early career path, and references to specific cases that aligned perfectly with stories he'd told at dinner parties. The papers detailed a cover-up involving Richard Blackwell early in his legal career. He had been a junior associate at a prestigious firm when he discovered that his boss, Senator James Holloway, had been embezzling campaign funds and using them to support a secret second family. Rather than report the crime, Richard had helped conceal it in exchange for partnership in Holloway's firm and political connections that would later launch his own career. Merritt's hands had trembled as she read the incriminating correspondence. Her father, who prided himself on his integrity and had built his reputation on being incorruptible, had secured his entire career through blackmail and complicity. The family wealth, their social standing, even the colonial house where they'd grown up, all of it had been built on this buried secret. The documents included detailed financial records, correspondence between her father and Senator Holloway, and even photographs of meetings that corroborated the timeline. The alumnus who donated the papers had been a journalist investigating the scandal before it was buried, but he'd never published his findings. Instead, he'd kept the evidence for decades, perhaps as insurance. For days after her discovery, Merritt had been in turmoil about what to do with the information. Her first instinct had been to confront her father, but years of being dismissed made her hesitate. Would he simply deny it? Would her mother believe her husband over her daughter as she always had? Would this be seen as just another attempt by Merritt to cause trouble? She'd considered anonymously leaking the documents, but that felt too destructive, too final. Despite everything, she still hoped for some kind of reconciliation with her family. So she'd decided to approach her father privately to give him a chance to explain and perhaps even acknowledge the irony that it was his disappointing daughter who now held the key to his carefully constructed reputation. Merritt had planned to bring it up after her birthday dinner when the moment felt right. She'd imagined a scenario where her father might finally see her worth, where the family dynamic might begin to shift. Perhaps naively, she'd hoped this could be a turning point. But now, standing unacknowledged in her parents' home, while they celebrated Sabrina Merritt, realized how foolish those hopes had been. Nothing would change because they didn't want it to change. The roles had been assigned long ago, and no evidence, no achievement, no milestone birthday would alter the script. As she slipped out of the house unnoticed, Merritt's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Daphne. "Happy birthday. How's the family dinner going?" Merritt stared at the message for a long moment before typing her reply. "There is no dinner, they forgot. Celebrating Sabrina's Paris trip instead." The phone rang immediately. "That's it," Daphne said when Merritt answered. "I've been telling you for years to stop giving them chances. What are you going to do now?" What indeed, Merritt thought as she drove away from her childhood home. The archive documents were securely stored in her apartment safe. With them she could destroy everything her father had built, expose the hypocrisy at the heart of the Blackwell family legacy, and force them to finally see her. Really see her, even if through the lens of their own downfall. But was revenge what she really wanted, or was it recognition, justice, simply to matter? By the time she reached her apartment, a plan had begun to form in her mind. It wouldn't be a nuclear option, but a carefully calculated chess game. She would use her discovery not to destroy her family, but to finally claim her place within it, or decide once and for all that she didn't need them. The next morning, Merritt called in sick to work, something she never did. She spent the day meticulously organizing the evidence, creating a timeline, and researching the current whereabouts of everyone mentioned in the documents. Senator Holloway had died years ago, but his children, the legitimate ones, were still prominent in Connecticut politics. The scandal, if revealed now, would ripple through multiple families and institutions. She also researched her father's current cases and political aspirations. He was on the short list for a judicial appointment, something he'd been working toward for decades. The irony wasn't lost on Merritt that the man who had built his career on burying a scandal was now being vetted for a position where his character would be presumed above reproach. As evening fell, Merritt made one final call to Dr. Levinson. "I'm at a crossroads," she explained. "I have information that could change everything with my family, but I'm afraid of what it will make me if I use it." "The question isn't what it will make you," Dr. Levinson replied, after a thoughtful pause. "It's what you want to make of it." Revenge and justice often look similar from a distance, but they feel very different to the person enacting them. After they hung up, Merritt sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her father's moral compromise. Tomorrow, Sabrina would be flying to Paris, celebrating another victory in a lifetime of them. Her parents would be blissfully unaware that their overlooked daughter held the power to change everything. For the first time in her life, Merritt Blackwell had leverage over the family that had always made her feel powerless. The question was, how exactly would she use it? 3 days after her forgotten birthday, Merritt sat in her office at the university archive, finalizing her plan. The quiet, climate-controlled room with its meticulous organization and preservation protocols had always been her sanctuary. Here, history was treated with respect. Every document, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was cataloged and preserved for its potential value. If only families operated with the same careful attention to detail. Merritt had decided against an emotional confrontation or a hasty exposure of her father's past. Those approaches might provide momentary satisfaction, but would ultimately play into the family narrative of her being impulsive and unstable. Instead, she would be methodical, strategic, and patient, qualities her family had never given her credit for possessing. The first phase of her plan began with a simple email to her parents. "I'd like to schedule a family meeting when Sabrina returns from Paris. There's something important I need to discuss with everyone. This isn't a request." The uncharacteristic firmness of her tone prompted an immediate call from her mother. "What's this about, Merritt? Your father is very busy preparing for his judicial interviews, and Sabrina will be jet-lagged. Can't you just tell us now?" "No," Merritt replied calmly. "This needs to be in person. All of us. Next Sunday at 2 p.m. I'll come to the house." "But it's not negotiable, Mom. If you and Dad can't make it, I'll understand. I'll just have to proceed without your input." The implicit threat in her words hung in the air. After a moment of stunned silence, Eleanor agreed to the meeting. Phase 1 complete. For the first time, Merritt had set the terms of a family engagement, and her parents had complied. The second phase involved careful preparation of the evidence. Merritt created 3 presentation folders, one for each family member, containing copies of the most damning documents. She organized them chronologically with key passages highlighted, and supplementary notes explaining the significance of each item. The originals remained safely in her apartment, with digital copies stored securely in multiple locations. She also prepared a detailed analysis of the potential consequences if the information became public. Her father's judicial appointment would evaporate, his law practice would likely face investigation, and the family's social standing would crumble. Senator Holloway's children, now powerful in their own right, would face public scrutiny and embarrassment. The third phase of her plan was perhaps the most important. Merritt reached out to a former boyfriend, Julian Reyes, now a partner at a rival law firm. They had parted amicably years ago when their career paths diverged, and had maintained a respectful friendship. Julian had always seen Merritt's worth, even when her family didn't, and she trusted his legal expertise. Over coffee in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant, Merritt shared her discovery and her intentions. "This isn't about revenge," she explained as Julian reviewed the documents. "It's about rebalancing a power dynamic that's been skewed my entire life. I don't want to destroy my father, I just want my family to finally see me." Julian studied her face. "Are you sure about that? Because these documents could do a lot more than just get their attention. This could ruin your father's career, possibly lead to disbarment or worse." "I know," Merritt nodded. "That's why I'm being careful about how I approach this. I need legal advice on where the line is between leverage and extortion." After examining the evidence, Julian confirmed its authenticity and significance. "Your father made a devil's bargain early in his career," he concluded. "But the statute of limitations has likely expired on any criminal charges. The real danger for him is professional and reputational." He advised Merritt on how to present her case without crossing into legally actionable territory. "Make it clear that you're not threatening to release the information in exchange for anything specific. That could be construed as blackmail. Instead, frame it as a family secret you've discovered that needs to be addressed collectively." The fourth phase of her plan involved preparation for the aftermath. Merritt knew that confronting her family would forever alter their relationship, regardless of the outcome. She met with Dr. Levinson for an extended session, working through various scenarios and strengthening her emotional resilience. "Your family has conditioned you to doubt yourself," Dr. Levinson observed. "When they respond with denial, anger, or attempts to discredit you, and they will, you need to be prepared to stand your ground." They role-played potential reactions with Dr. Levinson taking on the personas of Merritt's parents and sister, unleashing all the manipulative tactics they might employ. By the end of the session, Merritt felt centered and ready. The final phase was personal. Merritt took a day off work and drove to a small coastal town 2 hours from the city. There, in a charming bed and breakfast overlooking the ocean, she celebrated her 30th birthday, belatedly but meaningfully by herself. She wrote in her journal, walked along the shoreline, and reflected on the 3 decades of her life. She realized that for too long she had defined her worth through her family's eyes. Their approval or lack thereof had shaped her self-perception in ways both obvious and insidious. This confrontation wasn't just about making them see her. It was about fully seeing herself independent of their validation. As the sun set over the water, Merritt made a promise to herself, regardless of how the family meeting unfolded, this would be the end of her quest for their approval. She would either establish a new, more equitable relationship with the Blackwells, or she would walk away permanently unburdened by their judgments. The week passed quickly as Merritt finalized her preparations. She monitored Sabrina's Instagram posts from Paris, endless selfies in front of landmarks and captions about expanding her professional horizons at a conference she seemed to barely attend. Their parents commented enthusiastically on every photo, their pride palpable even through social media. The day before the scheduled family meeting, Merritt received a text from her father. "Your mother mentioned you wanted to meet. I have a golf game at noon, but I can give you an hour beforehand if it's important." The dismissive tone was so typical that Merritt almost laughed. "The meeting stands as scheduled," she replied. "What I have to share will affect your judicial appointment. I suggest you cancel your golf game." There was no response, but Merritt knew she had his attention now. For the first time in her life, she was the one with power in the Blackwell family dynamic, and she intended to use it. Sunday arrived with the weight of anticipation. Merritt dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit she'd purchased for professional conferences, authoritative but not aggressive. She applied minimal makeup, pulled her auburn hair into a sleek chignon, and wore her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only family heirloom ever given to her rather than Sabrina. The woman in the mirror looked composed, confident, and completely in control. The drive to her parents' house felt different this time. Rather than the usual knot of anxiety in her stomach, Merritt felt oddly calm. She had prepared meticulously. There would be no emotional outbursts for her family to use against her, no impulsive reactions they could dismiss as typical Merritt drama. Today, she would operate with the precision and care she brought to her archival work. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio containing the 3 presentation folders. As she expected, her parents' driveway was full, her father's Mercedes, her mother's Range Rover, and Sabrina's BMW convertible, a graduation gift that had cost more than Merritt's annual salary. Eleanor opened the door with a tight smile. "Merritt, we've been wondering what this is all about. Your father had to cancel an important game with Judge Matthews, so I hope it's worthwhile." "It is, Mom," Merritt replied evenly. "Where is everyone in the living room?" "Sabrina's still a bit jet-lagged, so let's not make this too lengthy." The living room presented a familiar tableau. Richard Blackwell in his leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. Sabrina sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. The space where Merritt usually sat, the least comfortable chair positioned slightly outside the family circle, conspicuously empty. "Good afternoon," Merritt said as she entered, her voice steady. "Thank you for meeting with me." Her father looked up, impatience evident in his expression. "Well, Merritt, you've been very mysterious about all this. What's so important that it couldn't wait until our regular family dinner?" "You mean the dinners where you spend 20 minutes questioning Sabrina about her work, and then ask me if I'm still at that library job?" Merritt replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, this is considerably more important than those." The unexpected pushback caused a momentary ripple of surprise across her father's face. Sabrina put down her phone, suddenly interested. "While we're cataloging family patterns," Merritt continued, "let's acknowledge that we're meeting here because I insisted, not because any of you remembered or cared about my 30th birthday last week." "Now, Merritt," her mother began with a sigh, "we've already explained about Sabrina's Paris opportunity. These things happen in families. There's no need to be dramatic." "Actually, Mom, there is. Because that forgotten birthday was just the final example of a pattern that's defined my entire life in this family. But today isn't about that, it's about something I discovered recently in the university archives." Merritt opened her portfolio and removed the 3 folders, each labeled with a family member's name. Before I distribute these, I want to be absolutely clear: what I'm about to show you isn't a threat or an attempt at blackmail. It's information that affects this family, information that you all deserve to know about, and information that I have a complete right to discuss with you. She handed the folders to each family member. Please take a few minutes to review the contents. Then we'll talk. The room fell silent as they began reading. Merritt remained standing, watching their reactions. Her mother was the first to register, shock, her hand flying to her throat as she turned to look at her husband. Sabrina's expression morphed from boredom to confusion to a dawning realization that something significant was unfolding. But it was her father's reaction that Merritt watched most carefully. Richard Blackwell's face remained impassive as he methodically turned the pages, but Merritt, who had spent a lifetime studying her father for the smallest signs of approval, noted the telltale indicators of his distress: the slight tightening of his jaw, the barely perceptible increase in his breathing rate, the way his left hand curled into a loose fist on the armrest. When he finally looked up, his eyes were cold with fury. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "As I said, they were part of a collection donated to the university archives," Merritt replied calmly. "An alumnus who was investigating Senator Holloway in the 1980 seconds. He apparently decided not to publish his findings, but he preserved the evidence." This is ancient history," Richard sputtered, completely out of context. "You have no idea what you're looking at." "Actually, Dad, I do. I'm a professional archivist with a master's degree in information science. Understanding historical documents, their context, and their significance is literally my job." Eleanor was now rapidly flipping through her folder. "Richard, is this true? Did you really help cover up the senator's indiscretions?" "It wasn't like that," he said, shooting a venomous look at Merritt. "Holloway made a mistake, yes. But exposing him would have hurt innocent people. His wife, his children, and his legitimate children are now state senators themselves," Merritt noted. "While his other family struggled financially after he died, never acknowledged, never supported." Sabrina had been uncharacteristically quiet, absorbing the information with a calculating expression. Now she looked up at Merritt. "So what exactly are you planning to do with this? Destroy Dad's career, ruin our family's reputation, all because you're jealous that I got to go to Paris?" "This isn't about Paris," Sabrina, Merritt said, turning to face her sister. "This is about 30 years of being treated as less than. This is about Dad building his entire career on moral compromise, while simultaneously holding me to impossible standards. This is about finally having the leverage to make all of you stop and actually see me." "Blackmail," Richard said flatly. "That's what this is. You're threatening to expose me unless—" "What? What do you want, Merritt?" "I told you, this isn't blackmail," Merritt replied. "I haven't asked for anything. I simply wanted you all to know that I know the truth about our family's success, about Dad's carefully constructed image, about the foundation of lies everything is built on." Eleanor stood up suddenly. "I need a drink." She walked stiffly to the bar cart in the corner of the room and poured herself a generous measure of scotch. "Does anyone else want one? I think we all need one." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone declined except Richard, who nodded curtly. Eleanor brought him his drink, then returned to her seat, noticeably choosing to sit farther from her husband than before. "You still haven't answered the question," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What do you want from us, Merritt?" Merritt took a deep breath. This was the moment she had prepared for. "I want acknowledgement. I want you all to recognize that I have value in this family equal to Sabrina's. I want an end to the constant comparisons, the dismissals, the forgotten birthdays, and the diminished achievements. I want a relationship with my parents and my sister, based on mutual respect, not a predetermined hierarchy." She paused, looking each family member in the eye. And if that's not possible, if you can't see me as an equal member of this family even now, then I want you to understand exactly what you'll be losing when I walk away permanently. Wow, I can see this storyline really resonating with many of you who've dealt with family dynamics that just don't feel fair. The tension in that room must feel familiar to some of you watching right now. Have you ever had to stand up to your family in a moment that changed everything? Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Merritt's approach so far. If you're enjoying this family drama journey, please hit that like button. Really helps the channel. And if you're new here, subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now let's see how the Blackwells respond to Merritt's ultimatum. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the ice shifting in Richard's glass. Then predictably he went on the offensive. "This is absolutely outrageous," he said, slapping the folder down on the side table. "You come into our home with these ancient documents, completely misinterpreted, I might add, and have the audacity to issue ultimatums. Do you have any idea what you're meddling with?" Merritt had anticipated this exact reaction. "I'm not misinterpreting anything, Dad. The evidence is clear. You discovered Senator Holloway's embezzlement and his secret family. Instead of reporting it, you used the information to secure your position at the firm and launch your own career. It was a complicated situation," Richard insisted, lowering his voice and glancing toward the windows as if concerned about eavesdroppers. "Holloway was a good man who made mistakes. He was under tremendous pressure. Exposing him would have destroyed multiple families." "Including his second family," Merritt countered. "The one that never received any support after his death. The children who never got to attend the schools that Sabrina and I did, who never had the opportunities we had because their existence was inconvenient to a powerful man's." Narrative. Eleanor, who had been silently sipping her scotch, suddenly spoke. "I didn't know." Her voice was hollow. "All these years, Richard, I thought we built everything through your hard work and talent. You told me Holloway was your mentor." "He was," Richard insisted. "You're only hearing Merritt's distorted version of events." "I'm reading the actual correspondence," Richard. Eleanor said sharply, holding up a letter. "These are your words, your signature. I can be trusted to handle this matter with complete discretion. In return, I believe my value to the firm should be reassessed." She looked up at him, decades of blind faith suddenly fracturing. "That sounds like blackmail to me." Richard's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I won't sit here and be judged for decisions made 30 years ago, especially not by my own daughter, who clearly has no understanding of the real world." He turned to Merritt. "What exactly do you think will happen if you make these documents public? Do you think anyone will thank you for dredging up ancient history? The only thing you'll accomplish is destroying this family." "That's not what I want," Merritt said calmly. "I've already told you what I want." Sabrina, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "So this is all about you feeling neglected." Poor Merritt, always jealous of her little sister, finally found a way to force everyone to pay attention to her. "This isn't about jealousy, Sabrina. This is about decades of inequity. You've always been placed on a pedestal, while I've been treated as an afterthought. My achievements have been minimized, my career dismissed as that library job, my birthday completely forgotten in favor of celebrating you again. That's not fair," Eleanor protested weakly. "We've always supported both of you." "Really, Mom? When was the last time you asked me about my work? When was the last time you celebrated one of my accomplishments? When Sabrina got that entry-level marketing job, you sent out a family newsletter. When I was promoted to head archivist at one of the most prestigious university collections in the country, you asked if it came with a raise." Eleanor had the grace to look embarrassed, but Richard was unmoved. "You've always had a flair for drama, Merritt. Even as a child, you were constantly seeking attention, creating problems where none existed." "There it is," Merritt said, a sad smile crossing her face. "The gaslighting I've come to expect. Reframing my legitimate concerns as emotional instability." That might have worked when I was younger, Dad, but not anymore. She walked to the window looking out at the manicured lawn where she and Sabrina had played as children. I've spent years in therapy unpacking the damage from being this family's scapegoat. Do you know what Dr. Levinson helped me understand? That my emotional instability was actually a normal response to constantly being invalidated, dismissed, and compared unfavorably to my sister. You're seeing a therapist, Eleanor asked, looking genuinely surprised. Why didn't you tell us? I did, Mom. 3 Christmases ago. You changed the subject to Sabrina's new car. The room fell silent again. Richard drained his scotch, his expression hardening. So what now? You hold this information over our heads indefinitely, force us to treat you differently under threat of exposure. No, Merritt said firmly, that's not how this works. I'm not asking for preferential treatment or constant validation. I'm asking for basic respect and equality within this family. And I'm not threatening to expose anything. I'm giving us all a chance to heal, a dysfunctional dynamic that has hurt everyone, even if some of you don't realize it. She turned to face her father directly. Dad, your entire career has been built on projecting an image of moral superiority while hiding the compromise that launched it. That kind of cognitive dissonance takes a toll. It's shaped how you parent, how you view integrity, how you measure success. For a fleeting moment, something vulnerable flickered across Richard's face, a recognition perhaps of the truth in Merritt's words. But it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. You have no right to psychoanalyze me, he snapped. You have no idea the pressures I was under as a young lawyer, the compromises necessary to provide for this family. To provide for this family, Merritt repeated softly. Yet when it came time for college, you fully funded Sabrina's education while telling me to apply for loans. When Sabrina needed a car, you bought her a BMW. When I needed one, you suggested I take the bus. Sabrina shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For the first time, she seemed to be seeing the disparities through Merritt's eyes. What do you want us to say, Merritt? Eleanor asked, her voice tired. That we've been terrible parents, that we've favored Sabrina. What will that accomplish now? Acknowledgement is the first step, Mom. You can't fix a problem you won't admit exists. Eleanor looked at her husband, then back at her eldest daughter. I suppose we have made certain choices that might have made you feel less valued. That wasn't our intention. Intentions don't erase impact, Merritt said gently. And patterns that consistent aren't accidental. Richard abruptly stood up. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by my daughter about parenting when she doesn't even have children of her own. Sabrina, Eleanor, we're done here. But neither his wife nor his younger daughter moved. I'm not finished, Merritt said, her voice steady. And I don't think Mom and Sabrina are either. Richard looked at his family in disbelief. You're all buying into this, Eleanor. Surely you see what she's doing. Eleanor set down her glass. What I see is that our daughter has raised some valid points, Richard. And instead of listening, you're doing exactly what she described, dismissing her concerns and trying to end the conversation. It was the first time Merritt could remember her mother challenging her father directly. The shift in the room was palpable. Richard looked stunned. Eleanor, you can't possibly. I can possibly, Eleanor interrupted, straightening her shoulders. For years, I've deferred to your judgment on everything from investments to which schools the girls should attend. I never questioned why we spent more on Sabrina's education or why Merritt's achievements didn't receive the same celebration. I told myself it was because you knew best. She gestured to the folder in her lap. But this makes me wonder what else I've accepted without question. Sabrina had been unusually quiet, flipping through the documents with growing concern. Dad, she finally said, is this why Judge Sullivan always gives me that strange look at the club? Does he know about this? Of course not, Richard snapped, but his confident tone had slipped. Are you sure? Sabrina pressed. Because last month he made a comment about how some family secrets never stay buried. I thought he was talking about the Hendersons' divorce. Richard paled visibly. That's just Sullivan being cryptic. He enjoys making people uncomfortable. Or maybe Merritt suggested others have suspected the truth all along. Powerful men like to think they've buried their secrets, but patterns emerge for those paying attention. Eleanor was now staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. What else don't I know, Richard? What other compromises have you made that might someday blindside this family? This is preposterous, Richard blustered, but his authority in the room was rapidly diminishing. Merritt has taken some old correspondence, twisted its meaning, and now you're all turning against me. Nobody's turning against you, Dad, Merritt said calmly. We're simply asking for honesty. The same honesty you've always demanded from everyone else. The confrontation continued for another hour, cycling through Richard's denials, Eleanor's growing realization of how much she had enabled the family's dysfunction, and Sabrina's gradual shift from defensive ally to uncertain observer. Throughout it all, Merritt maintained her composure, redirecting attempts at deflection and refusing to be drawn into the familiar patterns of family argument, where she would eventually be labeled too emotional and dismissed. Finally, when it became clear that Richard would not acknowledge either his past ethical compromise or the family's treatment of Merritt, she gathered her papers and stood up. I've said what I came to say, she told them. What happens next is up to each of you. I'm taking a step back from this family until there's genuine recognition of these issues and a commitment to change. You all know how to reach me if and when you're ready for that conversation. As she turned to leave, Sabrina unexpectedly rose from the couch. Wait, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Could I talk to you privately before you go? Merritt was surprised but nodded. Of course. They stepped onto the back porch, leaving Eleanor staring pensively at her empty glass, and Richard angrily pacing the living room. I never saw it, Sabrina said, once they were alone. How different things were for us. It just seemed normal that they made a big deal about my achievements. That's how privilege works, Merritt replied without bitterness. It's invisible to those who have it. Sabrina nodded slowly. There's something you should know. Dad's judicial appointment. I overheard him talking to Senator Williams last month. Apparently there's already been some anonymous correspondence sent to the selection committee, questioning Dad's past associations with Holloway. That's why he's been so stressed lately. Merritt's surprise was genuine. It wasn't me. I believe you, Sabrina said. But it means someone else knows or suspects. Dad's past is catching up to him, with or without your discovery. She hesitated, then added, and I'm sorry about your birthday. I shouldn't have gone to Paris then. I knew what I was doing. It was the first genuine apology Merritt had ever received from her sister. Thank you for saying that. I don't know where we go from here, Sabrina admitted. But I think maybe we should talk more. Without them. As Merritt drove away from her childhood home, she felt neither the vindication nor the guilt she had anticipated, but something more complex, a mixture of sadness for what the Blackwell family had been, and cautious hope for what it might become. 3 months after the confrontation, Merritt sat at an outdoor cafe, watching people stroll through the university's historic quadrangle. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of change. She checked her watch. Sabrina was running late as usual. The weeks following the family meeting had unfolded in unexpected ways. Richard had initially doubled down on his denials and deflections, even going so far as to consult a lawyer about Merritt's baseless allegations. But his bravado had crumbled when, just as Sabrina had revealed anonymous information about his connection to the Holloway scandal, reached the Judicial Selection Committee. His name was quietly removed from consideration. Eleanor had surprised everyone by scheduling her own appointment with Dr. Levinson. After 2 sessions, she had called Merritt and asked to meet for lunch, just the two of them, no Richard, no Sabrina. Over salads at a restaurant they'd never visited together before, Eleanor had done something Merritt couldn't remember her ever doing. She had apologized. "I failed you," she'd said simply. "I allowed myself to be passive in a dynamic that hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know, I see it now." The conversation that followed had been awkward, painful, and more honest than any they'd ever had. Eleanor had revealed her own struggles with Richard's demanding standards, how she'd channeled her energy into promoting Sabrina because it seemed the path of least resistance. "Your sister was easier for your father to understand," she'd explained. "Your intelligence, your questioning nature, they reminded him too much of aspects in himself he didn't want to face." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. Richard predictably had retreated into wounded pride. He stopped speaking to Merritt entirely, and minimized contact with Eleanor, throwing himself into his law practice and spending more time at his club. The judicial appointment he'd coveted for decades was now permanently beyond his reach, and he seemed determined to blame everyone but himself for that loss. The most surprising development had been Sabrina. After their brief conversation on the porch, she had reached out to Merritt several times, initially with hesitant texts, then phone calls, and finally regular coffee meetings. Without their parents as an audience, the sisters were slowly discovering who they were to each other, without the assigned roles of golden child and scapegoat. "Sorry I'm late," Sabrina's voice interrupted Merritt's reflections. Her sister dropped into the chair across from her, slightly breathless. "Client meeting ran over." "No problem," Merritt replied, pushing a cappuccino toward her. "I ordered your usual." "Thanks." Sabrina took a sip, then set the cup down with uncharacteristic care. "So, I've made a decision. About Paris. The job offer." Sabrina had been recruited by a marketing firm during her conference, and had been debating whether to accept their generous offer and relocate. "I'm turning it down." Merritt raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought it was your dream opportunity." "I thought so too, but I realized something. I've been chasing external validation my whole life, from mom and dad, from peers, from employers. Paris would be just another version of that. Another achievement to post on Instagram, another success to report to dad." Sabrina fidgeted with her napkin. "After our family meeting, I started seeing a therapist too. She's helping me understand how much of what I've done has been about maintaining my role as the successful daughter, rather than figuring out what actually makes me happy." "And Paris wouldn't make you happy?" Merritt asked. "It would make golden child Sabrina happy. But I'm trying to figure out who I am without that identity." She smiled ruefully. "It's harder than I expected." Merritt felt a surprising surge of empathy. She had always seen Sabrina as privileged and entitled, never considering that the golden child role carried its own constraints. "So what will you do instead?" "I'm joining a smaller firm here. Less prestigious but doing work I actually care about, helping local businesses develop sustainable marketing strategies. And..." She hesitated. "I'm moving out of my condo. Getting a place without Dad's name on the lease." Merritt nodded, understanding the significance of that decision. Their father had co-signed for Sabrina's luxury condo and paid half her rent. It was a form of control disguised as generosity. "What about you?" Sabrina asked. "Still planning to take that fellowship in Boston?" "Actually, no." Merritt had been offered a prestigious archival fellowship that would have taken her away from Connecticut for at least a year. "I've decided to stay. The university's creating a new position for me, Director of Special Collections. It means more responsibility, more staff to manage, but also more creative control over acquisitions and exhibitions." "That's amazing, Merritt. Congratulations." "Thank you." The simple acknowledgement of her achievement, spoken without comparison or qualification, felt refreshingly unfamiliar coming from a family member. Their conversation drifted to other topics: a documentary Sabrina had watched, a rare book collection. Merritt was cataloging a mutual childhood friend who had recently gotten engaged. For perhaps the first time, they were talking as equals, as friends, even rather than as competitors in a game Merritt had never consented to play. As they prepared to leave, Sabrina hesitated, then asked, "Have you heard from Dad at all?" Merritt shook her head. "Not directly. Mom says he's still processing." "That's one way to put it. He's barely speaking to me either since I told him about the new job and apartment. It's like he can only relate to us if we're playing the roles he assigned." "Give it time," Merritt suggested, surprising herself with the compassion in her voice. "He built his entire identity on a certain narrative. It's going to take him longer to adjust than it has for us." Sabrina nodded, then impulsively reached across the table to squeeze Merritt's hand. "I'm sorry it took all this for us to actually become sisters." As Merritt walked back to her office after lunch, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken since the confrontation. The document discovery that had initially seemed like a weapon had ultimately been a tool for healing, not through exposure or public humiliation, but through the private reckoning it had forced upon her family. She had prepared herself for rejection, for her family to choose denial over transformation. Instead, at least for Eleanor and Sabrina, the confrontation had created an opening for change. Richard remained entrenched in his defensive position, but even that represented a shift. His authority within the family had diminished, his infallibility questioned. Merritt had also changed. The anger and resentment she had carried for decades had not disappeared entirely, but they had softened into something more nuanced. She was learning to hold her family accountable without letting that accountability define her. As she unlocked her office door, she noticed a small package on her desk, with a sticky note from her assistant. "Delivered this morning. No sender information." Curious, Merritt opened the package to find a velvet jewelry box. Inside was her grandmother's sapphire necklace, a family heirloom that had always been promised to Sabrina. A handwritten note accompanied it. "This should have been yours. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Dad." It wasn't an explicit acknowledgement of all that had transpired, but from Richard Blackwell, it was an unprecedented concession. Merritt touched the sapphire pendant, feeling its weight and history. Perhaps transformation was possible even for the most resistant hearts given enough time. 1 year to the day after her forgotten 30th birthday, Merritt stood in the doorway of her childhood home, experiencing an unsettling sense of déjà vu. Once again the house was filled with people. Once again a celebration was underway. But this time, as she hesitated at the threshold, her mother spotted her immediately. "Merritt, you're here." Eleanor hurried across the foyer to embrace her. "Everyone's in the garden. We were just about to call you." The past year had brought changes no one in the Blackwell family could have predicted. Richard's law practice had suffered after he was passed over for the judicial appointment, and rumors about his early career had circulated through legal circles. Rather than face mounting scrutiny, he had made a surprising decision: early retirement. The man who had defined himself through professional achievement and social standing had sold his partnership in the firm and purchased a small sailboat. He spent most days on the water now, initially alone, later occasionally inviting Eleanor to join him. The time away from courtrooms and client meetings had forced him to confront the hollowness at the center of the identity he had so carefully constructed. His relationship with Merritt remained complicated. There had been no grand reconciliation, no dramatic acknowledgement of past wrongs. Instead, there were small gestures like the sapphire necklace, brief awkward phone calls, a birthday card that arrived on time this year, signed with an unpracticed "Love Dad" in his precise handwriting. Eleanor had undergone the most visible transformation. After decades of deferring to her husband and protecting family appearances at all costs, she had reclaimed parts of herself that had been submerged in the role of Richard Blackwell's perfect wife. She had resumed painting, a passion abandoned shortly after marriage. She had reconnected with college friends Richard had deemed not our circle. Most significantly, she had started setting boundaries with both her husband and her daughters. "Your father and I are in counseling," she had confided to Merritt over one of their now regular lunches. "I won't pretend it's easy for him, but he's trying. We both are." Sabrina had indeed taken the local marketing job and moved to a modest apartment downtown. Without the constant pressure to maintain her golden child status, she had discovered genuine interests beyond career advancement and social positioning. She had joined a community garden, adopted a rescue dog, and started dating someone. Richard would never have approved of a high school history teacher with a passion for environmental activism. As for Merritt, the changes in her life were less external, but equally profound. Her promotion to Director of Special Collections had brought new challenges and opportunities. She had published 2 academic papers, curated a well-received exhibition on women in Connecticut politics, and been invited to speak at several prestigious conferences. But the most significant change was internal. She no longer measured her worth through her family's eyes. She no longer craved their validation, or dreaded their judgment. The freedom from that lifelong pattern had allowed her to form healthier relationships in all areas of her life. She had even started dating again, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Julian, her former boyfriend who had advised her during the confrontation, had re-entered her life in a new capacity. What began as occasional professional consultations had evolved into dinners, weekends away, and now a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. "Is Julian parking the car?" Eleanor asked, bringing Merritt back to the present moment. "He's coming separately." "Had to stop by his mother's first," Merritt replied, following her mother through the house toward the garden. The backyard had been transformed with string lights and tastefully arranged tables. About 30 people mingled on the lawn, a mixture of family, friends, colleagues from the university, and a few faces Merritt didn't recognize. In the center of it all stood Sabrina, looking relaxed in a casual sundress, rather than her usual designer attire. She was laughing with her boyfriend, one hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly. The pregnancy announcement 5 months ago had come as a surprise to everyone, including Sabrina herself. "There she is," Sabrina called out, waving Merritt over. "The aunt-to-be. I was just telling Chris about your insane knowledge of Connecticut history." The ease between them still felt new but no longer strange. They had discovered that without the toxic competition that had defined their childhood relationship, they actually enjoyed each other's company. As Merritt moved through the gathering, accepting a glass of champagne and greeting familiar faces, she spotted her father standing slightly apart from the group, watching the proceedings with an expression she couldn't quite read. After a moment's hesitation, she approached him. "Dad." "Merritt." He nodded, his posture stiff but not unwelcoming. "Your mother's outdone herself with the arrangements." "She has," Merritt agreed. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken history. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I understand you're being considered for the Archibald Grant." Merritt was surprised he knew about the prestigious research funding she had applied for. "Yes, I should hear back next month." Richard nodded. "It's well deserved. Your work on the Holloway papers was thorough." It was as close to an acknowledgement as he had ever come regarding the documents that had changed their family dynamic. "If you need a reference letter, I still have some contacts at the foundation." "Thank you, Dad. I'll keep that in mind." Another silence, less strained than the first. Then Richard said quietly, "Your sister wants to name the baby Eleanor Merritt. If it's a girl, her idea, not mine." Merritt felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "I'd be honored." Before either could say more, Eleanor called for everyone's attention, gathering the guests around a table laden with gifts for the impending arrival. As Merritt moved to join the group, she caught sight of Julian entering the garden. He smiled when he spotted her, and she felt the familiar warmth his presence always brought. He would fit seamlessly into this gathering, unaware of the complex history that had preceded it, the painful journey that had led to this moment of tentative family healing. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Merritt found herself alone in the kitchen, helping Eleanor pack leftover food into containers. Through the window she could see Richard and Julian in deep conversation on the patio, Sabrina and her boyfriend playing with a neighbor's child on the lawn. "A year ago I couldn't have imagined this," Eleanor said, following Merritt's gaze. "All of us together actually talking instead of performing." "Me neither," Merritt admitted. "I want you to know something," Eleanor said, setting down the container she'd been filling. "I'm proud of you. Not because of your career successes or your relationship with Julian, though those are wonderful, but because of your courage. You disrupted a destructive pattern when it would have been easier to keep playing your assigned role." Merritt felt tears threatening. After a lifetime of seeking her family's approval to receive it, now genuine and unsolicited, was overwhelming. "We still have work to do," Eleanor continued. "Your father may never fully acknowledge his part in all this. I may slip back into old habits. But we're trying, Merritt. And it started with you refusing to be invisible anymore." As the evening ended and Merritt prepared to leave with Julian, she paused at the same doorway where she had stood frozen a year earlier, watching a celebration from which she had been excluded. Now her family gathered to say goodbye, Eleanor with a warm embrace, Sabrina with plans for lunch the following week, even Richard with an awkward but sincere pat on the shoulder. The Blackwell family was far from perfect. The damage of decades couldn't be undone in a single year. But as Merritt walked toward her car, Julian's hand comfortably entwined with hers, she felt something that had eluded her for most of her life, the sense of belonging, not despite who she was, but because of it. The invisible daughter had finally been seen. What a journey this has been. Has your family ever experienced a reckoning that changed everything? I know from personal experience that family karma can be powerful sometimes. The truth is exactly what's needed for healing to begin. If this story resonated with you in any way, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can lead to unexpected healing. Subscribe if you want more family drama stories with satisfying endings, and tell me in the comments if you've ever had to be the one to break unhealthy family patterns. Thank you so much for watching my story of family betrayal and eventual redemption. May we all find the courage to speak our truths when necessary. Until next time.